So to anchor our chats, I have two learning goals for us to look at together today. The first is, reframing accreditation as an opportunity for faculty agency and faculty voice in your units, schools, universities more largely. And then using a theory-driven lens, pulling from these theories, exploring 4 actionable shifts in how we approach our accreditation practices, and showing you exemplars from my own work as to how I've piloted some of these shifts with different institutions. So if you have chosen to spend your Friday listening to a talk about accreditation, I'm going to assume you are either a total accreditation nerd like me, or I'm the only one in the room, which is fine, and as is the far more likely case, you have pulled the accreditation short straw at some point in your career, which happens to all of us, right? But this is probably a reality you are at least somewhat familiar with. Accreditation that feels high stakes, that feels accountability and compliance driven, that feels restrictive and constraining, out of sync with your day-to-day work, and for which there are really sort of devastating consequences, and the potential of devastating consequences more than just a little anxiety provoking, right? We know that faculty often experience accreditation as a burden and is disconnected from their day-to-day teaching practice. It is that extra other. And the research on accreditation offers almost no help around this. Typically, research and literature on accreditation addresses the bureaucratic barriers in the accreditation system, but doesn't attend to what we can do in our day-to-day practices to implement accreditation better and to actually find some joy in the work. So in my work as a practitioner leading accreditation, and then also now as a doctoral student in the School of Education and Human Services, stepping into research, I've really been looking at and thinking about how we sort of interrogate this framing around accreditation and restructure it, recognizing first and foremost that accreditation is a socially constructed process, right? Accreditation standards, accreditation systems are created by our peers. They are created by people who could be any one of us who choose to sit on a committee and form together a vision of standards about what we believe we want our institutions and our student outcomes to look like. And so when this socially constructed sort of vision that we've developed becomes reified into a rigid fixed system and becomes a policy paradigm whereby it's now tied to federal dollars and accountability metrics and negative consequences, we lose that opportunity to experience accreditation as generative. And that's not a shortcoming on our part. It has become baked into the system of accreditation because of the way that it's tied to sort of money and tied to our understanding of academic quality, reputation, all of those pieces. But we have to question this in order to be able to shift our thinking and get to a point where we can approach accreditation differently. So my question today is, what if we instead think about accreditation as shared spaces for realizing and enacting faculty vision and faculty values? And what does it look like to do that? So I propose, as I said, 4 shifts. The first comes from improvement science, and it might be one if you've done any work in accreditation. It's probably one you've heard of before because it's already fairly well adapted and agreed with in accreditation work. But it's one that we forget all of the time, again, because of that high stakes, high accountability pressure of accreditation. And so it bears repeating. So improvement science from Tony Bright or from W.E. Deming, looking at the idea of cycles of continuous improvement, where we move away from seeing this work in accreditation and assessment as something that happens once every 7 years or once every 3 years or even once a year, and instead seeing it as an act of continuous improvement that we engage in all the time. So traditionally, what we tend to see in a lot of institutions or in a lot of units that do accreditation work is the idea of an annual data day, where we get everybody together and we look at all of our data and we figure out what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and we talk about it and we write a report about it and we send it in. Useful, but disconnected from the real flow of faculty work. Faculty are teachers, and so they are changing and improving and innovating all of the time, not just on one day-to-day a year. And so improvement science calls on us to think about shifting this idea of a one-time, point in time, discrete moment to continuous cycles of growth and improvement. So moving from an annual day-to-day to a year-round embedded calendar that leverages existing meetings. So piloting this in one institution that I've worked with looks like this. This is small, I know that, but it looks like this. This is an example from the Cal Poly School of Education. This was their calendar of all of their standing meetings. Cal Poly is on a quarter system, so they meet fall, winter, and spring, and they have all of the committees you might expect. An executive committee, a teacher education committee, a recruitment and marketing committee, a committee on the curriculum, a committee on community partnerships with local schools, all of those pieces. But in order to create a more continuous improvement science approach to this accreditation and data work, they asked themselves, when are our regular data pieces released? When do we get our survey data? When do we get our assessment data? When do our students fill out and feedback forms about our programs? And then also, what cross-cutting conversations do we want to have as a community and normalize in our way of being? So do we want to have a conversation every year about restorative justice in our programs? Do we want to have more conversations about ed tech? And then they mapped those cross-cutting conversations and data releases onto their existing calendar cycle. So rather than asking folks to clear their calendar for one day and come and talk about data for 8 hours, which is enough to make anybody's eyes bleed, they instead dedicated 30 minutes at all of these standing meetings and set that time aside for embedded data protocols that were related to the mission and the work of that committee. And so what this did was two things. First is we now have year-round engagement and improvement, which is a small shift, but a big shift. And the second is that we now have broader stakeholder engagement and improvement, because instead of being busy on one day and not able to attend a data conversation, any of these committees becomes a point in time for somebody to plug into the conversations around continuous improvement work. And so after their accreditation visit, we actually got asked by another institution, what did you do to prepare people for your accreditation visit? What did you do to coach all of your stakeholders to make sure everybody was on message? And the answer was, we didn't, because we didn't have to, because the message was what was lived every day, every committee meeting, every conversation all year long. So this is one way to do that. By the way, all of the accreditation work for Cal Poly, because of the way accreditation structures work in California, is publicly available. They have to create a public-facing website for transparency. So if you're interested, it's that QR code right there. But you can see all of their accreditation documentation and steal any of the ideas for frameworks and layouts. But this shift, this improvement science shift, thinking about how do we use data in a more continuous and iterative way, also leads us to the next shift, which is thinking about where this kind of work lives, not just with one person, but with broad stakeholders. So this comes from systems theory, organizational culture, and learning theory, thinking about the idea of taking the work of accreditation and shifting it from a one-person burden to shared culture. So what we tend to see in current practice in many places, many spaces, is what our Dean John Marjoram Lays calls the pizza and Pop-Tarts model of accreditation. And he describes this as, we have a director of accreditation and she sits in her office working on an accreditation report, and we slide pizza and Pop-Tarts under the door until the report is written and she's done with it, right? As the director of accreditation, I appreciate that my supervisor derives the pizza and Pop-Tarts model and is not the vision that he wants for our unit. But instead, organizational culture and learning theory encourages us to think about how do we shift from that one person sort of scenario to now building a culture of co-creative processes, shared ownership around accreditation, building a meaningful, sustained culture where everybody is part of the accreditation work and where faculty are a meaningful part of generating the improvement that we are doing for our accreditation. So an example, in both the institutions that I've worked, we've done something like this, which is documenting the cycle of the personnel and the responsibilities who are part of the accreditation work. So you can see in this cycle, we have the different parts of the continuous improvement cycle that comes from Reich and Demings, planning and coordinating your assessment activities, doing your data collection, doing your data analysis, use, and reporting, having discussions, decision-making, and implementation, and then back around the cycle. So that's that continuous improvement cycle piece. But then in the text off to the side, we also have who are the different personnel who are involved in this work, and who are the different people who touch our continuous improvement, and what are their opportunities to engage throughout various steps of the cycle. And in some ways, having this visual graphic that folks can see really helps more people to see and reinvest in the system. When you know where you sit in the accreditation work, it becomes that much easier to kind of buy in and understand that you are a meaningful part of this process, right? Everybody from the director of accreditation and continuous improvement to faculty and staff stakeholders, to our advisory boards and external partners, to our dean, to our certification office, everybody has a role in making this and continuous improvement cycle work. And so instead of it being extra, it becomes embedded in program decision making. And you have a clear path for different faculty voices, staff voices, stakeholder voices to be a part of the conversation and the continuous improvement work that needs to happen. And so it helps also to align the work that we do for accreditation with our professional values, rather than being imposed externally from an accreditor. This is now how we operate every day, and a meaningful part of what we believe in and what we do. But organizational culture doesn't shift without leadership. And so this is a change. And so another shift that I encourage us to think about is a shift pulled from change management theory. So moving from assessment and evaluation to documenting a theory of change. A lot of the times in current assessment and accreditation work, we are given a form, we're given a template, we fill it out, and we turn it in. And it has the questions on it that we have to answer, and we complete that. And that is what drives sort of the reflection and the process and the conversation. But the real work of accreditation is really about inspiring change in your unit. It's not about checking the box of what you've done well. It's about setting that North Star through the standards of where you are going and looking at how you work together to drive in that direction every day. So something that I have found to be very meaningful in working with folks around accreditation is, instead of framing things in terms of an annual report that has to be completed, framing accreditation work in terms of articulating and embodying a theory of change for your unit, how you believe change happens, and what are the changes that you are trying to achieve. This helps bring the work of accreditation in line with the values that your unit holds dear, with the scholarship and the theory that your faculty believes in, and makes a really meaningful shift that now you are pursuing change because you believe in it, instead of because you have to. So asking questions like, what are we trying to accomplish? What conditions must be in place for that to happen? How do we believe change happens? How do we believe we get to where we go? All of those things are meaningful. And documenting it is really powerful for your accreditors, because they want to see intentionality, not just one-offs. They want to see the culture and the story of your team, and why you do the things that you do on an everyday basis. So these are two documents that were created in my prior role. The first is the theory of change based on the driving factors in assessment and continuous improvement. So looking at things like, what do we believe are the best practices in teaching and learning? What do we believe about assessment and high stakes accountability? What do we believe about the barriers that we faced? I called this the plates in the air graphic, because it was all of the plates that my faculty were always spinning, trying to juggle, and trying to figure out, how do we bring all of those things into alignment? And through those conversations, we arrived at the graphic on the right, which was the community of practice for the School of Education. The theory of change for the unit I used to work with was very much that the educational vision that we wanted to achieve could be brought about by meaningful dialogue and community building, by common professional development opportunities, and by coordinated inquiry and assessment projects. The motto of that university, by the way, was learn by doing. And that is very evident when you look at their graphic and their theory of change, and what they believe to be the ways that they are achieving their vision, more than just accreditation. And articulating this theory of change and change management is also really powerful because it helps you decide what you're not going to do. On more than one occasion, we sat in a meeting talking about a potential initiative and we said, does it fit in the funnel? If it doesn't fit in the funnel, we're not doing it because it's not core to our values of who we are and how we believe we're enacting the change. If it fits in the funnel, then great, and let's make that happen because it's going to bring about the changes that we want to see. But things that don't fit in the funnel, we don't have capacity and bandwidth for that, and that's okay. This is the funnel that we're currently working on drafting for the unit that I now work with here at OU. Notice that there are similarities, but there's also a real identity difference. So the unit here at OU in School of Education and Human Services is very much about, and this was a phrase that was used on Wednesday in our conversations, being of the community in which we reside. So it's really core foundational work is being inclusive of the voices in our community and being responsive to the needs of our community. And that is what is evident in their funnel. And so putting this in front of our accreditor again now means when they come to visit us and they hear things from the different partners and the different stakeholders and the different collaborators that we work with, everything that they're going to hear is going to fit in the funnel. And it makes all of the work we do so much more intentional and a much more meaningful and powerful story for our accreditors. And it means that the work that we're doing because the faculty care about it and not because they have to do it for accreditation. So that brings us to our last shift again, which is that these things only happen if you have good leadership to enact them. In particular, transformative vision-led leadership. So a lot of the time when we talk about accreditation, and we've all done this, and I am victim of this as well, we say things like, we have to do this because our accreditors say so, right? We have to check this box. It doesn't fit in the funnel, but we don't have a choice. Instead, an important faculty-led shift is making that adjustment to centering the mission, the vision, the values, and the research agenda of the faculty, and then looking at where that's aligned to your accreditation work. Again, remember that your accreditation standards are written by people who share in your field. So most likely there is alignment between the mission, the visions, the values, and the research agenda of your faculty and whatever is written in the accreditation standards. It's just a matter of making those things explicit and transparent. So one of the ways that we do that is by articulating our value statement. This is the value statement that the School of Education and Human Services here at OU recently worked on. It happened across 2 committees, from our executive committee to our Think and Action tank. And the School of Education and Human Services wrote a value statement that captures, notice how all of these things fit in the funnel, being people and justice centered, being collaborative and community oriented, believing in growth and knowledge and scholarly pursuit, and then being responsible and leaders and stewards of place. And so now when we do things, it's not that we do them for accreditation, it's that we do them because we believe in them anchored in these values. And also then we put a little footnote at the bottom of the paper that says, and here's how it connects to accreditation for the future. Through these 4 shifts in practice, we can move accreditation from being box checking compliance to being a tool for faculty-led transformation. Faculty being continually involved in the data conversations and the improvement work, faculty being part of an organizational culture that is working together toward a shared vision for change, a shared set of values, mission, and vision. All of these things moving the ship toward the North Star of accreditation, but not because of accreditation, because it is the things that we believe in and affirm together, and we want to see realized for education and for our students. So hopefully you found some of that helpful in your accreditation work. If not, there is nothing in the world that I love more than having coffee with people to talk about all of the reasons that I love accreditation and why I consider it to be joyful, purpose-driven, meaningful work. And I am glad to extend that invitation to anybody at any time in the future. But I'm glad to entertain your questions in the meantime. Thank you.